Started. So welcome everyone. If you think you're in the Don't Let Sprawl Take It All webinar, then you're in the right place. That's what we're talking about here tonight. My name is Linda Lukasik. I'm the Executive Director of Environment Hamilton, and I'm really pleased to be here tonight with the rest of the Environment Hamilton team, Juby Lee, Ian Borsick, and Beatrice Ikoko. And we're all going to be talking to you tonight about this very important topic and the campaign that Environment Hamilton has launched to push for Hamilton City Council to commit to freezing Hamilton's urban boundary. But before we jump into the contents of tonight's meeting, I want to hand things over to Ian Borsick to give the land acknowledgement. Ian.
Thanks, Linda. So since we're all unable to gather in person, we wanted to acknowledge the land that at least the four of us are situated on, and it looks like a number of you are as well, which is the land that we call Hamilton, which is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is directly adjacent to the Haldimand Tract, 6 miles on each side of the Grand River that was returned to the Six Nations of the Grand River by the Haldimand Treaty of 1784. The larger territory of Southern Ontario is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which I'm sure many of you have heard about. It's an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe and the Mississaugas that bound them to peacefully share the territory and protect the land. It's important to note that the single spoon reflects the need to share and to ensure that the bowl is never empty. This refers to taking care of the land and the creatures that we share with it, and there are no knives, indicating the need to protect and share in peace. Subsequent nations and other peoples were invited into this covenant in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. I am grateful for the opportunity to gather on this territory, even virtually, and to work in this community. Through this land acknowledgement, my intention is to honor and show gratitude to the original stewards of this land as a sign of respect, and as a commitment to addressing the ongoing legacy of colonization and its impact on the people who still call this land home, as well as the land itself. And with that, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. I'll pass it over to Linda.
Thanks, Ian. All right, so just a few details. So people are aware we are recording tonight's session, and we're doing that so that anyone who couldn't join us tonight is able to access the recording. We're going to hold off on Q&A until the end of the session. And we'd ask you, if you do have questions, and feel free over the course of the webinar to type those questions into the chat, and we'll look very carefully and do our best to answer all of your questions. As well, the webinar slides and a recording of the webinar are going to be posted to the Environment Hamilton website for you to access post-event. And as well, we are going to be providing a summary action sheet that we'll email out to everyone who RSVP'd for the webinar, and we'll share links to the slides and the recording, but we'll also provide you with more details around the campaign and the actions that we'd like you to take. So don't worry, we'll have that all on a sheet for you to look at post-event. Okay, just very quickly, the purpose of the session tonight is we wanted to share with you where we're at with urban growth management in Hamilton, why it's problematic, where we need to go, at least where Environment Hamilton thinks we need to go. We want you to understand more about our vision. And we're also going to share with you what you can do to help us. So I'm going to start with just a very brief bit of background. I want to start by saying that for some time now, Environment Hamilton has been raising concerns about urban growth management in Hamilton. We've had long-standing concerns about the city's interest in expanding the boundary out into Elfrida, and that's the area that you see on this map. Elfrida is made up of mostly prime agricultural land. It sits in rural Hamilton on the edge of the urban area. And the darker the green, the better the quality of farmland. So you can see that parcel outlined in red has a lot of top quality farmland within it. So we believe, given where we sit right now, that it doesn't make sense for us to be continuing to accommodate urban growth by allowing expansion onto rural farm fields and natural areas. We're calling for the city of Hamilton instead to figure out how to accommodate urban growth within the boundary, within the current urban area. And we firmly believe that that's what's needed to facilitate the creation of more complete, climate resilient, and inclusive neighborhoods. And as we keep on saying, you can't eat houses. And really, for far too long, the city of Hamilton has allowed low density residential sprawl to occur on our prime agricultural land and rural natural areas. We've lost too much already. So we did host a webinar a month ago, and we asked the question, will sprawl take it all? And we've concluded with good reason that yes, the city of Hamilton is heading down a pathway that will take us there. So we're back with a part 2 webinar, and we're saying don't let sprawl take it all. Our message to you is that we all need to mobilize and demand that our Hamilton City Council chart a different course, a climate resilient course. Otherwise, urban expansion or sprawl is going to continue to gobble up significant areas of prime agricultural land like Elfrida and rural lands in our municipality. And it's going to bring more climate challenges for all of us and for future generations to contend with. So I want to start tonight with just a very brief recap of some of the key elements that we highlighted in the last webinar. As I've already said, the city has a long history since 2006 of wanting to expand out into Elfrida, and that's been an issue and something that we've raised concerns about. But you also need to understand that we're now facing additional challenges with a provincial government, the Ford government, which has actually made changes to provincial planning policy that are making it easier for sprawl to happen. So I just want to talk about those challenges very briefly. I think it's fair to say that the former Liberal government, which brought in the Greenbelt Plan and growth planning efforts within the Greater Golden Horseshoe, they put some good policies in place. And it's not an exaggeration to say that the current Progressive Conservative government, since taking power in 2018, has really been working hard to dismantle all of that progress that has been made around regional planning policy in the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And these are policies that were designed to curb sprawl, and in so doing to create more livable, climate resilient communities. And it's really important to understand this and the fact that many of these changes have already been put in place by the Ford government. So everything on this page, on this current slide, is already in place. And it's only exacerbating the urban sprawl challenges we're now going to have to deal with here in Hamilton. And our message is that we need to push back. So just very quickly, some of the changes that are problematic. One change is that the provincial government has adjusted policy in the growth plan to allow private boundary expansions up to 40 hectares, or the size of a decent sized farm. And prior to this, only municipalities could initiate a boundary expansion. So a private landowner could initiate this process, and it can happen outside of the city's more comprehensive and controlled process for determining if and where it might expand the urban boundary. So this is a bit of a chaotic addition by the Ford government that does allow those private landowners to step up and push for their land to become urban. And we do have some applications here in Hamilton that are moving forward. It's the 20 Road West Landowners Group that's been pushing on this front. And you've probably seen in the media some of the coverage around that. It's happening outside of the city's process. The provincial government also lowered urban intensification and density targets. So urban intensification is the percentage of residential units that need to go into the already built up area. And then density is expressed in terms of number of people and jobs per hectare. So that's normally the targets that are set in the sort of outlying areas within the urban boundary or green fields out in suburbia. So the province is lowering the bar. They're setting lower minimums that municipalities have to meet. But one point I will make here is that even though the province is weakening the rules and making sprawl easier, municipalities have the ability to set those intensification and density targets higher. So the province establishes minimums, municipalities are free to aim higher, and we all need to remember that and push for that. A third piece is the planning horizon, and that's been expanded out to 2051. And this is the period of time over which a municipality has to plan to accommodate provincial projections for population growth and jobs growth. And the municipality has to do that. They have no option. Normally, a planning horizon is over a 20-year time frame. This government has opted to increase it out to 30 years. And as you can well imagine, I mean, trying to predict what population and job growth is going to look like over 30 years is incredibly challenging. It's hard to do over 20 years. It's hard to get reliable numbers. So it's crazy to us that we've got the province pushing for a planning horizon that's this long. We've described it, as others have, as a land grab, as a way to push up front for a municipality to have to plan and expand boundaries to accommodate that kind of growth, even though there's so much uncertainty involved in doing that. So lots of problems with that piece, and it certainly has fed into the kind of proposal we're seeing from the city for boundary expansion. And then the last piece that is important to mention is that this provincial government has also modified something called the land needs assessment methodology. And I'll provide a definition of what that is for you in a moment, but it's, as you could well guess, it's an assessment to determine if we need more land to accommodate urban growth. This provincial government has reinstated market demand as a driving force for how that methodology works. And the previous focus under the Liberal government was on density and intensification targets. So think about that. We would point out that in the past, it was market demand and market forces that really got us into the mess that we're in now with a whole lot of sprawling development. If you want to do effective growth management, you really need to have solid density and intensification targets, and you need to track those and adjust them accordingly. So this shift as well is problematic if we're really concerned about and wanting to build more compact climate resilient communities. So just very quickly, this is what a land needs assessment is, and this is the city's definition. And so it's a technical study that really determines how much land is needed in the city to accommodate growth. As the city emphasizes here, it's completed based on a methodology developed by the province, and it's a required part of something called the city's municipal comprehensive review process. So there are a whole lot of GTHA municipalities going through this process right now, trying to determine if and how much land they need to accommodate future urban growth. So I wanted to show you this map too, because as we go along, you'll hear us making reference to the urban area and rural white belt lands and green belt lands. So this map really helps. And I don't know if you can see my pointer, but the area that's gray is the existing urban area. So if you think about the outer boundary of this area, that would be the urban boundary. So all of the land within that urban area is zoned for urban uses. So, you know, residential developments can happen, all of that sort of thing. The area in white is literally referred to as the white belt, and that's rural land that's wedged between urban Hamilton and the provincially designated green belt. And of course, the green belt on this map is green, which seems appropriate. So all of this green area is rural land within the municipality that's protected under the provincial green belt. And just in case you're wondering, the purple land is tender fruit land. So it's specialty crop area that's also part of the green belt. So you can see a shape here that looks just like the Elfrida area that I showed you, because that is Elfrida. So places like Elfrida and these other parcels of white are that land, rural land, mostly prime ag land that the city is now eyeing for future urban expansion. And we're asking questions about, you know, whether that's really appropriate for our community. Because basically, what we don't accommodate here or within the existing urban area is going to end up in the white belt. It's going to end up as, you know, expanded sprawl area on the outskirts of the existing urban part of Hamilton. So some of you may have been part of the consultation that the city of Hamilton did. So the city has been consulting. They did a session, a virtual session in January related to their land needs assessment. Actually, they did 2 sessions. So what's happening right now is there's a draft land needs assessment out there that the city has been seeking public input on. And it set out a number of scenarios for people to consider around, you know, where we need to grow and how the land need changes based on things like intensification and density targets. So just very quickly to give you a sense of what we're talking about, at the top of the page where you see 3,440 hectares, this is the assessment the city showed if we continue business as usual to accommodate the growth projections to 2051 using the kind of density and intensification targets we've been realizing in the municipality. And you can see it's pretty horrible, and it's reflective of the fact that we haven't been serious enough about increasing density and increasing intensification within our municipality. And that has meant, you know, sprawling outwards, and that's an approach that can't be sustained. And then they've provided a calculation showing if they met those growth plan minimums, those watered down or reduced minimums that the provincial government has set, still a lot of land will be required. So in the consultation that the city did, they allowed the public to provide feedback on 2 scenarios. One is a scenario they describe as an increased targets scenario, and we can share the website and you can go and look at that in more detail. That's the 1,670 hectares that would essentially use up all of the developable land within the white belt that I showed you on the map. And then there's also a growth plan minimum. And the city describes this as their ambitious density scenario. That still will consume most of the white belt. So for us, going through this process, and we certainly heard this from other Hamiltonians who were part of it, is that there was a lot of frustration around there not being an option to see what a firm urban boundary scenario would look like for Hamilton. An option where we just keep that gray area at the size that it's at now, and we focus on accommodating future urban growth within that area with an eye to protecting that rural land for good reasons into the future. So we want to share more about that with you tonight. And we really see that as the viable solution, especially over the coming decade, to dealing with building a climate resilient future. So our solution is to freeze the urban boundary and to push for the municipality to do precisely that. And here's some reasons why we're arguing that freezing the boundary makes climate sense. So I've already made reference to one of them, is that the next decade is really critical for addressing the climate crisis. And the reality of this existential threat means serious climate action must take priority. That seems so obvious to us that it's painful. How can we not be putting that at the top of the agenda, given where we're at? A firm urban boundary is going to facilitate building a climate resilient Hamilton because it's going to provide the critical leverage that we need to facilitate intensification of all forms within the boundary. And this obviously is going to need to be combined with progressive policies to get us there. Finally, the alternative scenario, accepting a market-driven approach that drives massive urban expansion, to us is simply untenable at this point in our city's history and in the planet's history, really, if we hope to move to climate resilience. And so we're now going to share with you our vision for the future. And we all thought this was an appropriate cartoon to share. And it's that sentiment that even if we have climate, and I know we don't have any climate deniers on this call, but even for the people out there who think it's a big hoax, we would say to you, we've got nothing to lose and everything to gain by pushing for a firm urban boundary and subsequently realizing some really wonderful changes for our community. So think about that too, as we're moving forward and talking in more detail about that vision. Okay, so I'm just going to set the stage by talking to you a little bit about the physical form of cities, because I think what happens is when people hear the word intensification, they picture this, and this is actually an aerial view of part of Hong Kong, super high density. So what I'm going to say to you is that in Hamilton, there are areas of the city where we do want to see higher density. Probably not as high density as what we see in Hong Kong, but for instance, we know in the downtown core, there already is a policy in place at the city to allow buildings up to 30 stories in height to accommodate more people in the core of the city. So there are parts of Hamilton where higher density makes sense, and we support that. But there are also a whole lot of other ways to get more people living within the urban boundary. And we want more Hamiltonians to be talking about this. And you've probably heard this term, the missing middle. And so between those extremes of the really high density and the single family, the sort of more sprawly, high land use approaches to development, there are all kinds of options in between. Right up to apartment buildings that are 4, 5, 6 stories high, and duplexes and stacked townhomes and that sort of thing that can really help us to fit more people within the urban area. And then there's also the option of second dwelling units, or SDUs, and the city is they're midway through developing a policy right now to make this happen. And that could be everything from laneway suites to granny flats to homeowners putting another dwelling unit that they could rent out into their existing home. So lots of potential there. If you imagine a policy that covered the whole city, what that could mean for more units to support people's ability to live within the urban area in Hamilton. And this is just one final slide to show you some of the other possibilities when you start to think about land within the boundary. The city already talks a lot about nodes and corridors. So we've pointed out Upper James, which to us provides huge potential for redevelopment along that corridor. There are lots of parking lots, or people refer to that kind of underutilized urban land as gray fields. That could be put to more efficient use. And with, with good transit service along the route, we could help people to live low carbon lifestyles along a major arterial like that. We've dared to include a slide of the LRT route here because we're hopeful we're going to get that built. And that's going to be a really important higher order fixed transit line that'll support lower city east-west intensification all the way along the route. And then this is a really interesting one, that idea of gray fields and the suburban shopping mall and transforming it into something something far more climate resilient, in the sense that there's the opportunity there to replace parking lots with mixed use retail, commercial, residential. And in the case of Eastgate Square in the east end of Hamilton, the city, to its credit, already has a great secondary plan that's anticipated that kind of transition. So there are lots of planning provisions in place there to facilitate that moving ahead. So that's just to set the stage on the physical form. And I'm gonna hand over to Ian now to take us through the next section.
Thanks, Linda. So as we're talking about sprawl and the effect it'll have on the city, we also have to look at city services that the city provides that are vital. Public transit, or RHSR, in the city of Hamilton is incredibly vital. We know from the city of Hamilton's own measurements that transportation is the single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions when you remove industry from the equation. And so if we were to look at community emissions, and when I say community emissions, I mean emissions from us on this call, everyone here, the major driving factor for that is transportation emissions. And that's a result of people driving more, purchasing vehicles that emit more, such as the prevalence of SUVs and pickup trucks. But really, it's also driven by the fact that people are living in areas where public transit isn't serving their needs. So really, ultimately, with sprawl and public transit in the city of Hamilton, we're looking ultimately at building outwards and establishing entire communities, when in the city of Hamilton, we have entire communities that don't actually have HSR service yet. So I'll ask Linda to go to the next slide. And this image was put together by a former intern of ours, Angela. And what she did was she was able to look at the mapping of where urban intensification has happened from the years 2006 to 2016. And then we simply overlaid that intensification and over the HSR bus route map. As you can see on this, we have entire communities that have densified quite significantly, that either get very little transit service. Waterdown is a prime example of this. They don't even have a connection to the rest of the city via HSR. But in that bottom right, you can see that a community like Binbrook has densified and intensified quite a bit. And still to this day, they receive little to no transit service. Major reason for this is that the city of Hamilton has a program in place called area rating for transit. And essentially, if you are living outside of the old city of Hamilton boundary, so the Metro Hamilton boundary, you only pay for the HSR service that you receive in your ward. So introduction of new service is incredibly difficult, because at first you have people paying into a system inefficiently. So they're paying a lot more for less service. And it's really hard to convince residents to start paying for a service that's immediately inadequate. And with the topic of Alfreda, we're talking about building up a community that right now has no taxpayers in it. And for us to be able to provide transit to that community, we would need to have taxpayers to pay for that service. And so really, with the way things are set up right now, transit can't be serviced to Alfreda without a special exemption being made. While at the same time, even if we were able to deliver transit service to Alfreda without any issues along that way, as we can see from this map, we have inadequate services to much of our community already. So when we're adding more community space on top of that for people to be serviced by HSR, we're making our current expansion plans significantly harder. And Linda, I'll just ask you to jump to the next slide for me. And really, and this is another major issue, especially within the city of Hamilton, is because of emissions. This is an image using the city of Toronto as an example, but I can promise you city of Hamilton's no different. Neither are any other cities really. And as you can see here, folks who live on the outer peripheries of the city, who don't live in the downtown core, that don't live where there's robust transit service, they're emitting a lot more per capita compared to their neighbors who live in the downtown core. And the major reason for that is transportation. Former Environmental Commissioner of Ontario, Diane Sachs, likes to say that Ontario's tar sands is urban sprawl. And the reason for that is because it makes a select number of people a lot of money. It's permanent. And ultimately what it does is it's a decision that's being made by our governments that has compounded and locked us into emissions. So when we're talking about building new communities on farmland, we're talking about building entirely new communities that will permanently increase transportation emissions for the city of Hamilton. That is just the reality for it. Linda, if you could just jump onto the next page as well. So really, when we're talking about sprawl, we're locking in the necessitation of private vehicle usage. We're undermining our existing ongoing public transit investment. And it's a one-time decision that essentially the city of Hamilton is making to make our efforts to address our community greenhouse gas emissions and our transit expansion, understanding that mobility is incredibly important and we need to be providing this service to more people. We're making that permanently more difficult for the city of Hamilton to accomplish. But transit isn't the only thing like this that is going to be impacted by sprawl. And the next up will be, if Linda just wants to jump over the next slide, is sprawl and stormwater. So this is an image I'm sure many people on this webinar have seen possibly, especially if you've attended any of our events in the past, but this was from a major storm event in the city of Hamilton. And essentially what we know from climate change projections is that we're going to be seeing more severe rainfall events in the city of Hamilton, both in winter, as we can see outside from this past weekend, but also in the summer. And essentially with stormwater, that is the water that falls on our impervious surface area, builds up, and then finds its way either into our lakes and streams after bringing all the nasty junk that we find on our streets and parking lots with it, or ending up into our stormwater management system. Linda, could you jump on to the next slide, please? And so this is a major issue for the city of Hamilton, and I'm sure many people on this call are very aware of this as well, is that the city of Hamilton has combined sewer systems. And what that means is that stormwater and wastewater from our houses are all ending up in the same place. This can end quite disastrously when we have a major stormwater event where combined sewer overflow tanks need to be dumped into Lake Ontario. Even worse case scenario is when those combined sewer overflow tanks are left open slightly for several years, which we also know happened. But really how this relates to sprawl is that by continuing to pave over what was green land or agricultural land, you're building up impervious surface area and you're creating more of the stormwater problem for us to deal with. Even if these communities are built out in a sustainable way that doesn't have combined sewer overflows, we do know, and some city councilors, such as my city councilor for Ward 1, Maureen Wilson, has pointed out, is that city residents of the old city of Hamilton are paying for that infrastructure to be built out. So we're paying a lot more money up front to basically make the problem worse for ourselves when we haven't had a good handle on the problem as is with regards to stormwater. While we at Environment Hamilton have been pushing for a stormwater fee. Ultimately, new developments, especially the Alfreda development, won't be taking that into effect. And we are permanently going to be increasing the amount of impervious surface area and essentially making that problem for us always more difficult to deal with. And Linda, I'll just ask you to jump onto my last slide here. So again, sprawl means more impervious surface area. This means that there will be more stormwater going into our management system instead of the soil to hydrate our plants and crops. And we know from climate change is that it's increasing the amount of precipitation in our stormwater events. And so really we have to ask, why would the city of Hamilton knowingly make the problem worse and make our ability to address this problem worse going forward? And really, that's what urban sprawl is going to do for both transit and for stormwater issues, is make it harder to deal with the problem, make the problem worse, and ultimately make it permanently more difficult to reach an adequate level of service that we are trying to strive for. And that'll be it for me on transit and stormwater, and I will hand it over to Judy.
All right, thanks, Ian. Hi, everyone. My name is Juby, and my main project is the Trees Please project. And I want to talk to you tonight about our vision for Hamilton in relation to trees. So we know trees provide many benefits, and they're an important tool to increase our city's climate resiliency. We have all this existing impervious surface, and trees help slow stormwater down, like Ian was saying. It's one of their many benefits. For this vision, I wanted to take some time to focus on our city's street trees. As many of you know, the city has a draft urban forest strategy. And in that strategy, they identified that while street trees account for approximately 3% of Hamilton's total tree population, they actually represent about 24% of the total forest value. So they're an important part of our urban forest. As well, the strategy identified 37,000 potential street tree sites, so lots of potential. Next slide, please. So one of my projects, Trees Please, that we share with the Hamilton Naturalist Club, we've been going neighborhood by neighborhood in the lower city, collecting air quality data and tree inventorying. And we see examples of streets just like this, with potential tree planting locations, streets with boulevards. Could you imagine if we focused our energies on planting trees and increasing our tree canopy coverage, what that would look like? This street, for instance, Regina Avenue, is just east of Kenilworth. Next slide. So I popped in a bunch of trees. It just totally changes the landscape when we have large mature trees, but we need to plant them now. Next slide. The next, so this one is at Cannon and Gage, and we have little examples of this, these little strips of mowed areas that provide no shade, they have no biodiversity. We can definitely plant more trees in spaces like this. Next slide. Next slide. So our city hall. We have a number of these planters. Every spring, the city plants things in them, and in the fall, takes them all out. The planters themselves are too small to, whatever contents are in those planters will freeze in the wintertime. So they take all that plant material out and just keep replanting it. We want to see more trees, and in front of City Hall would be amazing. Next slide, Linda. Next slide. Here's another example. So this is John and Main. Development is on the right. I'm not quite sure what's happening here. That space seems to be empty, and it's been empty for a while. But it's much easier to put trees in when development is in the planning stages or is happening than it is afterwards. So next slide. Could you imagine if we, ensured that all these developments had trees and big trees, and not do the thing that we see very frequently across development plans, where development will fill up all the space, and then whatever green space is either left over is small, or they simply have trees planted elsewhere off-site. So for us to focus on having big mature trees on developments as they're in the planning stages is really important. And on the left, you can see that I added a few trees in front of this parking lot. And, we're at the point that we have so much concrete and asphalt that we have to be creative, and we have to put resources in so we can plant some trees in some of the most challenging spots. Next slide, please. And there's existing technology that can help us. So I just want to talk very briefly about soil cells. This helps with tree survivability. They're like stacking frames you can see in the corner picture on the left. So they can either go outwards or they can go upwards. They're basically frames that get filled with soil, and then you can put a lid on it and then add some existing infrastructure on top, like sidewalks or pathways. You can see in the photo on the top right, where the tree roots then are able to access that soil, and their survivability, they're calculating to be in the decades. It's hard to be a street tree. Their survivability is at 7 to 12 years. I mean, that is incredibly low, and it's expensive for us, right, to be going back and planting and then taking out and then replanting. So investing in the soil cells when development is happening, investing in soil cells where we need to have more trees makes sense to us. So you can see on the bottom, these two before and after photos, they were taken as part of Central Parkway's Mississauga project, and they were able to put 6 trees in this little boulevard, which is amazing. Next slide, please. So our office, as many of you know, is located at Wilson and Houston in the Sonic Onion Records building. And this little strip of green space we've had our eye on. Next slide. We want to build a mini forest. We want to build many mini forests. We want many forests to be built everywhere. This is the Miyawaki's method. It's a Japanese botanist idea. It's using up urban spaces and intensely planting an urban forest. You include all the layers, the canopy, the understory, the ground layer, the forest floor. And by planting so intensely, the plants actually compete for resources and the forest grows 10 times faster than if you were just to plant a singular tree. These urban forests are filled with native species and the biodiversity is 20 times what it would be compared to a non-native managed forest. In Hamilton, as most of us know, that we're part of the Carolinian forest and there's approximately 70 different kinds of native trees are found in our area. We also have the escarpment. So we have these green spaces, but we need to ensure that trees and quality green spaces are distributed equally throughout our city. Our tree canopy coverage is calculated at 21.2%, but we know that includes the escarpment. And we also know that from neighborhood to neighborhood, that number changes. This corner is in Beasley neighborhood, and that tree canopy coverage is calculated to be about 12%. So we need to invest in quality tree plantings in some of the most inhospitable spots. We need to be bold. So the next slide is just another shot. So this is the same intersection, just kind of step back. And then next slide, just what it would look like. Just so you all know, I use Google Maps and Canva. So, it's not a super polished, but I think it gets the feeling across. We need biodiversity to increase our climate resiliency. Climate change is accelerating the loss of our biodiversity, and in our urban spaces, we can create these little pockets. Imagine if we had pockets of forest throughout our city. All right, next slide, please. So that was a fun visioning exercise, and there's tons of other spaces that we could add more trees. We've got lots of space in our industrial areas and our institutional areas and our low residential areas. There's lots of trees that we can put a lot of trees in different spots. And here are some of the things that we're working on. So, we want to figure out ways of getting more native trees out there. And one of the most affordable ways is a project that we're working on, trees from seeds. So we've collected some Kentucky coffee pods, some white pine, and some red oak acorns. And we have them and we're storing them. And then in the spring, we're going to be asking people who would want to help us grow some trees to help us grow some trees. And if you're interested, definitely let me know. You can see we've created 3 little videos. If you go to Environment Hamilton's YouTube channel, you can see those 3 videos as well as the plethora of other videos that we have. Yeah, next slide, please. So the city has created a draft urban forest strategy, and they're currently right now looking for feedback through their polls and a survey. We had a webinar a couple of weeks ago, and I see many of you here tonight. We're at that webinar. Thank you. And on our website, on the Trees Please page, there are links to that webinar that we hosted with HNC. We have resources, including an action sheet specific to that webinar that we will also include a link on to the action sheet for tonight. And yeah, this is what our treed version of Hamilton would look like. And yeah, I think that's it for me. Thank you, everyone. Beatrice is going to continue the conversation about what our city streets could look like. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Julie. So my section continues the discussion about working with the existing built form and evolving active, sustainable, inclusive, complete neighborhoods and communities as a solution to the sprawl problem that we're facing here. And as a project manager for the Friendly Streets Hamilton initiative, I'll focus on streets especially as pathways to complete communities. But first of all, what is a complete community? I like this simple definition from the government of Austin, Texas. It basically says, in a nutshell, a complete community is a great place that meets your daily needs within a short trip of where you live or work. So a community is complete when it provides access by foot or bike or transit and cars to jobs, shopping, learning, open space, recreation, and other amenities and services. And they also stress that simultaneously, they want complete communities that preserve identity, culture, and sense of place. Also like this definition of an inclusive and active community from the University of Delaware's Complete Communities Toolbox. An inclusive and active community is conscious of, yet goes beyond built form concerns by recognizing the need for residents to be involved in their community through various means in an effort to make it a better place to live. So I'm going to go to the next slide. And this one, hopefully, because I'm not looking at the slides, I'm just looking at my notes, but complete streets. So with streets being the backbone of complete communities, the City of Hamilton's definition of complete streets follows as complete streets are streets that are safe for everyone. People who walk, bike, take transit or drive, and people of all ages and abilities. Complete, livable, better CLB streets are Hamilton's version of complete streets. And they go on to say that the CLB streets approach is a shift away from the traditional design that has typically prioritized the movement of motor vehicles. I also want to add that for everyone's information, the City of Hamilton has been designing a complete, livable, better streets design manual that will, and I quote here, engage designs that better balance considerations for the different transportation modes that share streets. So they're going to focus on enhancing road safety and design streets to address the transportation requirements and place-making functions of surrounding areas. So they're seeking public input on this draft, so you can go and visit their website and provide your feedback. There's a link there in the slide. And so now with these high order concepts in mind, let's shift into looking at the various strategies that have been applied towards complete street communities that we could apply to Hamilton. So next slide, which is going to be the 15-minute city. Am I on track here? I'm going to quick look. Yep, perfect. Okay. So you might have heard of the 15-minute city. It's an urban planning concept that's about refashioning cities so that, like the complete community concept, residents can reach local amenities like walking or rolling rather than commuting to these, but within a quarter of an hour, so just 15 minutes. And the concept has been pursued as a means of cutting greenhouse emissions and boosting livability in a number of cities around the world, especially Paris, where the mayor there, Anne Hidalgo, has embraced this model for the French capital's post-COVID recovery plan that will ensure that this recovery is actually a green and a just recovery. Leaders in cities like Barcelona and London, Detroit, Portland, these are some places that are already working towards a similar vision to make city life just better, more accessible, sustainable, and enjoyable, and places that people can, spend time in lingering. So in the Paris example, there've been massive investments in, I'm thinking about Juby's mini forests. There've been massive investments in the built form with more trees and gardens and greeneries, street closures to traffic, extensive cycle paths, community facilities, and even social housing. And so as these workplaces, as our shops and workplaces and jobs and homes are brought closer into a closer proximity, street space, because previously dedicated to cars, is now kind of liberated and for the life of the street and much more healthier, more connected, happier people. So the next slide is the 1-minute city. Now the 1-minute city takes the concept of the 15-minute city to an extreme hyper-local level. And it comes out of Sweden's, of course, everything comes out of Sweden, but so it comes out of Sweden's Street Moves pilot. The idea is to empower the residents to add public facilities right outside their doorsteps. You can imagine that, right? So the Swedish think tank ArcDes has come up with a building kit and you can see in this slide, it's basically, you can transform this kit. It transforms the way the city streets are used. So say, for instance, you wanted to have a pop-up park or a place where you can park bikes. It's all very, very tailored to your neighborhood. street. So residents can participate in planning the layouts of their own streets and cities so that cities better meet the needs of their neighborhoods, with the aim that every street in Sweden is healthy, sustainable, and vibrant by 2030, end of quote. Next slide is slow streets, quiet streets, healthy streets, active streets, friendly streets. So while Canadian cities are nowhere near to what's going on in Sweden or Paris and such, many are capitalizing on expected changes in mobility patterns as a result of this pandemic and the current increase in both cycling and walking by implementing changes to the built form that will endure beyond the COVID emergency and become normalized forms of transportation. One of the best ways, as Ian mentioned, to reduce carbon emissions. Typically, emerging from the need to also support local businesses, cities such as Toronto and Vancouver and Ottawa and Montreal and Markham and Kingston all have different types of street treatments in this respect, from anything from routine street closures to slow streets and quiet streets. And you can see how this type of effort, this effort can really lead to resilient communities, bringing us closer to the 15-minute and even eventually the 1-minute city. And in this example, it's a Kingston's Quiet Street pilot initiative, where quiet streets are conceived of as corridors that prioritize non-motorized road users through the systemic placement of traffic barriers. And they are designed to reduce and slow down traffic. So, they're typically introduced on local residential streets that are already desirable routes for walking and cycling and rolling. And by redirecting traffic away from these routes, quiet streets increase engagement in active transportation, which is what we want, while enabling access to key destinations within and even beyond residents' neighborhoods. So the next slide, this is an example of here in Hamilton. You might remember last summer, the street closure Saturdays on Locke Street and the King William Street closure for a dining district, both led by business improvement areas. And these really created a lot of opportunity to do proper physical distancing, as well as created more fun, vibrant spaces in a very tough time that we're all having during the pandemic. And now the next slide, equitable, inclusive. Finally, in working towards a sustainable Hamilton of complete communities, complete streets, and so on, inclusivity and equitability must be centered, because the streets are not neutral. They tell stories of the neighborhood and the community, whose needs are prioritized and reflected, whose are not, who is being seen, who is not, whose history remains, who has been erased, who belongs, who doesn't. When the city of Oakland, California, in this slide, you picked in the slide, California, they closed streets to traffic during COVID. Its Slow Streets initiative to expand recreational space and such revealed a fix for designs that cater to the needs and interests of white and moneyed communities. So when they look back at what happened, the city decided to ask its Black and Latino communities, what do you need in your community to survive this pandemic? And what emerged from this deeper, more inclusive and specific approach to community engagement was the Slow Streets Essential Places program. And I'm going to quote directly from their site. These are temporary traffic safety improvements at pedestrian crossings to enable safer access for residents to essential services, including grocery stores, food distribution sites in public facilities, COVID-19 test sites that overlay with the city's high injury network and the highest priority neighborhoods according to equity indicators such as race and income. 15 sites around Oakland are now designated as essential places during this pandemic to reduce a threat to pedestrians in these high injury corridors. Again, most of them located in low income communities of color. So the Essential Places initiative, really basically you can see it consists of cones and barricades and such signage strategically placed to slow or divert traffic. It's not a perfect solution, but the reports show that it's definitely helping people move around and get to their destination safer without getting, the fear of getting hit by vehicles. Now, if only we could see this sort of commitment from our city leaders when it comes to the work that we are doing here with Friendly Streets Project to create a safer walking environment to the Dr. Davies School on Wilson Street. I haven't put a slide here, but this, you saw images of the Wilson Street and in Juby's slides in the Beasley neighborhood. And the school, the Dr. Davis School I'm talking about, is a school that's hemmed in by 2 industrial truck routes, severely narrow sidewalks, no pedestrian crossing, no tree canopy to speak of. And so our most recent efforts has been to engage the school board trustees, and we'll see how that goes, because creating safer, more vibrant, more equitable neighborhoods in this built form that we already have is really everybody's responsibility. So thank you. That's it.
Thanks, Juby, Ian, and Beatrice for sharing all of that information with us. And we really hope that starts to paint a picture of what can be. And I think interesting also to reflect on how acute crisis like a pandemic has fueled and fast-tracked some really amazing changes in cities. We wish there was more happening in Hamilton. I think, we would, at least all of us at EH would agree that more could and should be happening. But I think it also points to the fact that there is potential for change, whether short-term or long-term. And certainly all of us as community members who care about these things, we need to be informing ourselves and asking the right questions and pushing for change. So I just wanted to share, as we transition into the section of tonight where we want to talk to you about the campaign that we're rolling out, just wanted to share some really great examples of global leaders where amazing things have happened in terms of how cities are built, what they've achieved in accommodating lots of people, and how they continue to innovate. And a really great example is Barcelona in Spain. And anybody who's been there will recognize the characteristic superblock structures. So it is higher density, but not crazy high density. I think those superblocks are usually about 6, 7, 8 stories high. And in Barcelona, they have a whole lot of people living in a small geographic area. So low carbon footprint because it's combined with great transit, great active transportation, but they continue to innovate. So this is a shot of an intersection of one of those super blocks where the local government has committed to restricting vehicular traffic and creating even more space for people to get out and enjoy the neighborhood. And there's greening and there are opportunities for socializing. So it's a really great model that the city of Barcelona just continues to try to make even better. And when you look, you can find lots of great images of other cities, other global cities that are transitioning and embracing much more climate resilient approaches to redevelopment. This is a neat one in London at Morden Wharf. I think what's really attractive here is the treatment of the stretch along the waterfront in terms of naturalization and lots of trees and pervious surfaces. So lots of really interesting things happening in this example too. And then to bring us closer to home, and those of you who were on our last Sprawl webinar would have seen this slide because I've become a big fan of City of Brampton and what they're doing. And I wanted to share this example again, because this is a really, I think, a spectacular example of a gray field redevelopment. So this is the intersection of Kennedy and Steeles in Brampton, and the vision for how that space is going to change. So if you can imagine, the city is taking an area, again, I would compare it to, the intersection of Centennial and Queenston in the east end of Hamilton, where Eastgate Square is. So part of the redevelopment here is a very large old style shopping center with a very huge parking lot. And the whole plan here is to redevelop, to intensify, to accommodate more people in this area, to provide retail at the street level. And then when you look at the streetscape, you see what Juby did for you, lots of amazing trees, ultimately. Lots of consideration of active transportation. You can see bike lanes, you see nice wide sidewalks for pedestrians. There still are lots of lanes of traffic, but one of those lanes in each direction is for higher order transit. So this redevelopment will bring, I think by the time this is all built out, 100,000 people within a 15 to 20-minute walk of higher order transit. And that's simply incredible. This is what building a climate resilient future for an urban area is all about. And in the case of Brampton, it's an within the urban boundary example that they've prioritized. And it's the kind of thing that we really believe the city of Hamilton should be prioritizing too, instead of building outwards. So we want to get you involved in the campaign to see our Hamilton City Council commit to freezing Hamilton's urban boundary. We're encouraging people to write, email, or call the mayor and members of Hamilton City Council and ask them to make that commitment. We'd encourage you, if you haven't yet, please sign our petition to freeze Hamilton's urban boundary. we'll use that as we continue to advocate for this to happen. We would also encourage you to get involved in the next steps in the cities. The overall process, which will span over the year, is the municipal comprehensive review. But that key piece that we've already talked about is the land needs assessment. And the next step on that front is coming soon. So that draft plan with those two scenarios that I described, that draft plan that lacks that firm urban boundary option, is slated to go to the city's general issues committee in March. So we're talking a few weeks from now for council to consider and potentially approve. There's an opportunity there for people to delegate and speak to that report. So we'll certainly be looking to recruit anyone who's willing to consider doing that as well. And again, we're going to share all the details with you about how you can take these steps in the action sheet that we email out to you. We also want to make sure that more of you are aware of the Hamilton Community Climate Action Network. And this is an effort we're rolling out in neighborhoods across the city. And we're looking for people to help us to build that climate resilient, inclusive Hamilton. We can all make a difference by organizing in our neighborhoods, by taking action at home, by taking action in the neighborhood, by thinking and reflecting with neighbors on how you're moving in and out of your neighborhood, maybe reflecting on what's the state of the urban canopy on our street and what could we do about it. There are lots of things we can all do to make a difference. And we're encouraging you to consider getting involved. And at this point, the best first step that you can take is to email us at climateneighborhoods@environmenthamilton.org. And we're working to, if we have someone else who's already stepped up in your area, we'll connect you. So we're working, or if there's an organization, in some cases, we've got neighborhood associations that have already actively reached out to us. So we want to keep on building a network where people can connect within neighborhoods and between neighborhoods, and we can all roll our sleeves up and work towards that amazing vision for the future of our city. And I also wanted to make sure you're all aware of another event happening tomorrow. It was just booked within less than a week. And this is MPP Sandy Shaw. Sandy is the NDP's newly announced environment critic. And she's been paying close attention to these issues around sprawl and the concerns that we all have about provincial policy changes. So at this session tomorrow night, I'll be there sharing some of what we shared with you tonight. But I would encourage you to sign up because it's not just me that you'll hear from. You'll hear from Sandy. You'll also hear from Drew Spolstra. Drew is a local farmer. He's the chair of Hamilton, the City of Hamilton's Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee, and Drew is also the vice president of the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. I think it's very valuable for you to hear from a farmer about how the farming community is feeling about this issue of outward expansion into rural areas. So it'll be worth signing on to hear from Drew. And then another guest tomorrow night is Jane Fogel, and Councillor Jane Fogel is a councillor with the town of Halton Hills, and she's taken a stand and raised concerns about the process that municipalities are having to go through to deal with urban growth management. She's managed to get unanimous support from her town council to ask for more time, arguing that these are huge issues for communities to be dealing with, thinking about 30 years of growth into the future, and they deserve the time and face-to-face communication. So they've gotten that motion through the town of Halton Hills. My understanding is that this week that motion is going to Halton Region for consideration. So we'll be watching that closely too. So that's a lot. I'm going to stop there now, and we're going to open it up to some questions. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen now as well, just so you can all see us a little bit better, and we'll shift into Q&A.
So there's a lot of comments and a lot of questions, and I'm wondering if folks could open up their chat. And then there's some great, I think there's some great comments, but maybe we should just go through specifically the questions and then maybe highlight some of the comments afterwards. But the quality of these comments, I think we agree on a lot of these statements. So
Okay.
I think the
Juby, I can jump in. There was a question from Cal, and the question is, and just so folks don't have to scroll up, notwithstanding that improved public transit has to be part of the solution, have you considered other solutions such as community Uber, where some American cities are already eliminating vehicles by using smartphone technology to make drivers instant Ubers where they're prompted to host or join carpools. Yes, we have looked at these things. The city of Hamilton right now is through the HSR looking at a pilot project in Winona with regards to on-demand transit. It is incredibly important to note, though, that as it stands right now, ride-sharing companies, so private ride-sharing companies, very much rely on bleeding ridership away from public transit. When Uber did its initial public offering, it explicitly said that their goal was to take customers away from public transit and have them take their cars. Ultimately, though, when we're talking about on-demand transit or on-demand ride-sharing services, the best way of really looking at that would be to really look at the ways of introducing transit service where it isn't currently. So Winona would make a lot of sense for that. Binbrook would be something else that would be potentially along those lines, but they didn't like their previous pilot program that they already went with. So really what we need to really keep in mind is that with urban expansion and urban sprawl, it makes transit and adequate transit service that much more difficult to really ultimately build out in service. And ultimately, no matter what, relying on private vehicle usage, either on demand or through ride sharing or carpooling, it really just ultimately will not generate the greenhouse gas emission reductions that are necessary to avoid 2-degree warming as outlined by the IPCC. So yes, while there is a place for that, it wouldn't be the solution for Alpharetta, for example.
I just wanted to jump in because there are some comments around frustrations with City of Hamilton and planning issues, and I think what really grabbed my attention was, and I'll read it. Someone has put, the City of Hamilton makes it very difficult for Hamilton residents to fight and question development rezoning bylaws, for instance. 5 minutes is all that is permitted per resident to speak in front of the committee members. It's BS. And I can certainly, I feel for you, and I share the frustration with the time limits. I think especially right now, given that we're dealing with things virtually, in face-to-face planning committee meetings, if you're able to get there during the daytime on a weekday, they can't limit your time in person, but they seem to be doing that virtually. But one thing that I would say, and it's funny because I actually said this to a councillor the other day, because we've been requesting the opportunity to meet with councillors to discuss the land needs assessment and our concerns about it. And I prefaced my discussion with this councillor by saying, councillor, part of the reason why I reached out and I wanted to talk to you was because I feel like I need more than 5 minutes to talk to you about the next 30 years of planning for our city. So what I would say to anybody who's feeling that frustration is that there's huge value in picking up the phone, requesting an opportunity to meet with your ward councillor one-on-one, writing them a letter, sending them an email, but taking that opportunity to reach out in that way, and then hope that you'll have the time that you need to really share with them why you're concerned in the way that you are. So I just want to throw that in there when I saw that comment, because I think that's a really, I think it's a way to go if you're feeling frustrated about that crazy experience that you have with the 5 minutes. I mean, the last time I delegated, I got cut off before I was finished saying what I wanted to say. So I certainly feel your pain on that front.
Yeah.
Linda, there's a question from Jim. To what extent are these up to 40 hectares expansions being requested by developers? Are there requirements that only longtime landowners are able to do this? Yeah, no. So anyone can, Jim, and there aren't limits. So my understanding is, somebody could, they could ask for a different. They have a lot of land, different 40-hectare parcels in different locations. I think it was a city planner who explained this. They also don't necessarily need to be contiguous, like right beside the existing urban boundary. Now, the one good thing here is that the municipality has the right to refuse the request, and the municipality has final say. So a private landowner could come forward with a pitch for a boundary expansion, but the province at least left that power to say no in the municipality's hands. In Hamilton, we do have several that have come forward, and they're within the same area. I think it's at least 2, if not 3 applications at 40 hectares each.
the city has made it clear that they're not excited about the idea, and that's both at the bureaucratic level and the political level. They're not excited with the idea of having to entertain these proposals, especially since we are partway through this comprehensive process that's supposed to be looking at if and where it makes sense for us to grow. But as far as I understand, these particular landowners are continuing to persist with these applications. And the frustration is that when that happens, even if the city is ultimately going to say no, the city does still need to devote planning staff resources and time into properly assessing the applications and providing, a reason for why they're not willing to accept. So I hope that answers your question.
Juby, there was a question and I'm having trouble finding it. Oh no, it's here from Bev. The ecological value of a mature tree is far greater than that of a newly planted tree. Why are we not looking at a tree bylaw? Most cities have them. Why not in Hamilton? It's far easier to preserve what we've got than scramble to replace what's getting cut down.
Absolutely. And that is something that is a huge gap in the urban forest strategy draft that's out there, that there's some mention of, private tree protection, but it's, that is a bigger conversation. And we know that there's going to be some pushback from city councilors and things like that to get that. And why we don't have that now is, I think in some of the comments, there's talk about lack of leadership at the city level, and that is an example of that. So absolutely, we need private tree protections. We need more than one-to-one replacements. We need, canopy coverage replacement versus, you cut down one big ginormous tree, you can plant a little sapling and, all is fair is fair. And that's not how it should be. So absolutely agree with you on that one. Linda, there is some comments from Nancy and Cal are kind of related. Please speak to the big attraction for the city to continue Sprawl. Is it financial?
It shouldn't be financial because Sprawl never pays for itself. So that's always been a more than a bit of a head scratcher for me. So that's a good question. The cynical me says that it's pressure from the people who own that land, right on the other side of the urban boundary. And I'm gonna say that out loud. I think we need to reflect on that reality. There are people who are land speculators who, a lot of that land in Elfrida, for instance, is already in the hands of people who hope to be able to develop it. But one thing that I always say is that when you're speculating, you're gambling. And I think it's fair to say that we've hit a point in time, and I keep saying this, we've hit a point in time in the history of this planet where we have an existential crisis grave enough that, I don't know about you, but I'm tired of having to give over what should be viewed as a common good so that a small percentage of our community can benefit through developing an area when there are alternatives that we absolutely must be prioritizing. So that's definitely a concern for me looking at this issue, and I would hope that we would have more municipal councillors looking at this and critically reflecting on what does constitute the common good moving forward. How do we get to a point where, like Ian described, we haven't even properly serviced existing neighborhoods within the urban area with good public transit? How is it a viable option if we're expanding out even more that will achieve that? There's a very strong argument to be made that if we're committed to climate resilience, the firm boundary is the way to go, with a focus on enhancing neighborhoods in every way that we need to facilitate that low to no carbon lifestyle that we all absolutely are going to have to adopt within the coming decade. So I hope that answers the question. Speculators or gamblers, and tough luck if it doesn't work out for you. If it's the future, if it's the future of the planet and humanity and everything else around us at risk, I say, it's time to make firm decisions about a new pathway forward.
And to be a bit cheeky as well, there has been some great work, especially out of the city of Ottawa, highlighting which city councillors received donations from developers and how much of their total donations received during their campaign were from developers. And while I can't speak for anyone here in Hamilton, because I don't have the data, they have some city councils in Ottawa that received all or a vast majority of the money that they received to run their campaign to be elected was from developers or people associated with developers. So it's also worth noting that if someone has an incredible financial incentive to develop a land and see it get developed, they will go through other means and look to influence city council, much in the same way we're asking all of you to join us in influencing city council.
Mm-hmm. And speaking about data, there's a question from Dave. Do you have data on the city's past of projections of land needs and population growth?
Yes, so Dave, that data does exist, and it's interesting. Just so you're aware, these are provincial projections that cities need are required to plan to accommodate. So you can go into the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and you can even see previous pre-Ford government versions of that plan. And there is a schedule in the back that sets out both population and job growth projections. These have been a huge source of controversy, mainly because some of it was an attempt for the province to facilitate growth happening in certain areas. I don't know how effectively that's worked with the other policies around that, maybe not being as strong as they need to be. But we hear a lot about people groaning about the inaccuracy with some of those projections. And there are other, like Ministry of Finance apparently does projections as well that tend to be far more accurate. So there's been a lot of debate and discussion about those projections and how in many municipalities, since the growth plan has come into place, there have been overly optimistic projections that haven't come to be. So if you think about that, for a municipality, once the province makes those projections and the municipality has to start to plan to accommodate, the municipality is making some pretty serious decisions, even if they're going the route of intensification within the urban boundary, because they have to make sure we've got all the infrastructure and services in place to support that population. So my sense is that there is a need for us to do a better job of figuring out how to make it, as much as we can, those projections more accurate. But I think it also underscores the fact that a 30-year horizon is ridiculous, because we know, over 10 or 20 years, it's a challenge. But over that long a period of time, we know we're not dealing with accurate numbers. But you can certainly find information out there where people have compared. I think Neptis Foundation is one source where they've done comparisons of, here are the projections and here's how far off they were. Sometimes they're far off in interesting ways, where I think for the city of Toronto, there's been more intensification and population growth there than the province was projecting, as one example. So it's problematic in both directions.
Linda, we had a question from MPP Sandy Shaw. Thanks for attending, Sandy. And she asked, can you talk a bit about how this government's minister's zoning orders are also a threat with regards to sprawl?
Oh, goodness. Yes. So people are probably aware of, you've probably seen in the media reference to ministers' zoning orders. Historically, this is a tool that provincial ministers, Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, can use, and it's very rare circumstances where you'd need to use that power. It basically suspends any sort of power on the municipality side, including any sort of opportunity to consult with community. This government, and I'm just stating the facts, if you look at how MZOs have been dealt with since 2018, a whole lot of them have been issued. I've lost count. MPP Shaw may know, I think we're beyond 40 of them now. And there are some examples where they're extremely problematic, where we're seeing an MZO issued to facilitate building a warehouse in a provincially significant wetland. That's probably one of the most egregious examples up in Duffins Creek. We had one imposed here in Hamilton that affected the brow lands, and a process that that the city was working on with Mohawk College. So it kind of upended, people weren't expecting it, and it shook people up. So it's a tool that has its place, but the way that it's being used right now it's incredibly problematic, and it's creating a whole lot of concern in communities, largely across the Greater Golden Horseshoe, where we're seeing MZOs being thrown out and facilitating development in locations where a proper process would probably lead to a decision not to go there.
There's a question from Valerie. I'm just trying to find it. Valerie, if a developer cuts down a mature tree, which should be protected, they should have to plant a mini urban forest. Okay, now there was a question, right, Valerie? I gotta find it though. We should be going down in systematic order, it'd be easier. Oh, that HAA grounds. She's had a question to that effect.
Oh, sorry.
Anyway,
So many.
I'll find it. Yeah, I'll find it while you guys carry on with other questions.
While you're scrolling, there's a question. Has there been consideration to use hardy, deep-rooted native herbaceous plants in smaller green space areas where there might be pushback from the city or other stakeholders that do not want trees? That's a great question. And that's something we've talked to forestry about in terms of their street trees program. So, most of us know that you can ask the city for a free street tree and they come by and they plant it on the right of way that the city owns. And we've asked them about, can you offer shrubs and smaller smaller trees that, would fit in some of these spaces, right? Because, I think about all the neighborhoods, especially in the very urban cores, those front yards are tiny, tiny. So definitely that is, we want the tree in the right spot. So if it's not the right spot, we don't want that tree because it's just going to be a pain and it's going to cost us more. And people are then going to look at it and think, oh, why bother with trees if they're not the right trees in the right spots? So
yeah, so I found, sorry.
Sorry, Beatrice.
So Valerie's question is EH involved in the upgrading ideas for HAAA grounds?
Oh, I know that. So Trees Please is made up of both EH and HNC, Hamilton Naturalist Club, and Jen Baker has been chatting with Maureen Wilson about that. I'm not sure specifically about HAAA, but just about trees in general specifically. So we can definitely. I'm not involved directly, but I can definitely just check in and see what conversations Jen has had. We're doing our best out here to get as many native trees and great trees and great spaces for sure.
Mm-hmm. What is HAJ? That's it's a park at
Right.
Yeah. Well, what does the A stand for?
Hamilton Amateur Athletic. Something.
I don't know.
Association, I think.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
In
HAAA.
Kirkendall, yeah.
Everybody just calls it HAAA, so you
Yeah.
forget what the acronym stands for.
That's right.
There was
I
was just going to say there was a question from Avra, and she asked, "What's the biggest disconnect between EH and City Council?" Which I think is an interesting question. I will definitely give it over to my fellow panelists afterwards, but right now I think what's really happening is that everyone who's on this call and a lot of people both in City Hall and out of City Hall are really recognizing that we have to do things very differently. And I think for a lot of folks on City Council, that's very scary. And we're talking about fundamentally doing things different in such a way that is untested in Hamilton. And something that I find very common here in Hamilton, or a common sentiment from both city councilors and non-city councilors, is, well, just because something works somewhere else doesn't mean it'll work here in Hamilton. Mm-hmm. And really what we need to be pushing back against is this idea that Hamilton is uniquely incapable of doing good things.
Right.
In that, you have other cities adopting good progressive ideas. Beatrice really laid out a lot that's been going on. And for folks like me, I think, oh, wow, we could do that here. It looks so easy. But that is not the attitude that many in the city have. But I do think that's changing. And that's sort of what I think is the disconnect, is that the nervousness about diverging from the status quo.
You were very diplomatic in that explanation, but I think you have described it very well. And I would just add to that, I think, I also want to say that we have a long and solid history in this community of people coming together, especially when we know something is urgent. and it needs change, action and change. And I think, I mean, we're a resilient community as people. So it makes me hopeful that, you know, we're always talking about, let's aim high. You know, we've been discussing urban forest strategy. The city's target's too low. Let's be ambitious. Let's aim high, because we know in Hamilton people care, and you know, we can all collectively make it happen. And so it feels like the same sort of thing here, where I mean, I think in most cities, community members, there are always community members at the vanguard pushing for change. And I think Hamilton is no different. I think the added benefit that we have is this long history of this strong sense of place and sense of commitment to community that we could be using as our secret sauce to help us to get to where we need to go. You know, those politicians should be listening to what people are concerned about, and the vision that we have for our future, and helping us to get there. I think, rather than, you know, being the barriers in some ways to that possibility becoming reality. But again, I think this is where, you know, our message to all of you is pick up the phone and start having those conversations with your councillor. Find out what their position is on the issue. Find out, you know, whether they've looked at the land needs assessment and what they think about it. Ask them point blank, you know, if they're giving you a response that concerns you, you should ask them, who supports you when you run for council every term? Are you supported by developers? I think that's a fair question. It's public information.
I think Cameron Crotch is putting together that information, if I'm not mistaken. There's a website. I'll have to find it. I'm trying to find it, but I'll see if I can find it.
I was just going to jump in because there was one question here from Colleen, who's out in Stony Creek, and she's, and of course, you know, we all know about this example she's speaking to. She says, I live in the lake area on Green Road in Stony Creek. We're worrying about the excessive building taking place in our area. There are 3 towers planned for the corner of Green and North Service Road, and the largest one being 50 stories plus. And she says she and others are very concerned about the environmental impact of such a development. And she expresses concern about her councillor and how her councillor has responded. So Colleen, I just wanted to share that example just to make the point too, that when we're talking about accommodating more people within the urban boundary, that also includes paying attention to, you know, where does that make most sense? And that example, I think, is a really egregious example of what I would describe as hyper intensification. You know, those are towers that'll be taller than anything Hamilton is permitting in the downtown core. And the history of that parcel is that, you know, it was zoned in a way where there were no height restrictions at all imposed, which is crazy. I mean, that's not a sound approach to planning. And you know, it led to the point where you know, and Colleen will know this, where that neighborhood didn't even have an opportunity to weigh in on what the developer has ultimately proposed there, because of the fact that that parcel was zoned in such a problematic way. So put that out there just to say that, you know, sometimes, and this is a bad example where the process is horrible in terms of the outcomes, but we've now got a scenario there where if that developer does move ahead and build those 3 massive towers, that community is one of the red spots that Ian showed in his transit map. There's absolutely no transit service that goes to that location. So for goodness sakes, you know, why are we seeing a scenario like that unfold in a location where, you know, that we could see those towers built before there's proper and fulsome public transit service in the area? I'm sure they're probably scrambling now at the city to try to make that happen, but it also begs another question. Would that have been a priority location had that hyper intensification not been allowed to proceed? So some of this should include really talking about where are the places that make most sense for higher density development to happen. And fair to say that, you know, this one is a wacky, for a whole lot of reasons, outlier that's now going to create issues for the neighborhood moving forward. And that's not okay either.
And we had several questions about trees that I think, Juby, you're primed to answer. The first one was from, of course I can't see it. Are there any staff in forestry or parks at the City of Hamilton that EH can partner with? Anyone there who is interested in increasing naturalization sites in city parks?
Oh.
And then there was a follow-up question that I'm going to throw at you, Juby, as well, is sometime back, and I can't find the tweet, Jason Thorne, who's the director of planning, tweeted an article titled something like, "Every school should be near a forest." Is there room to approach the HWDSB to plant trees, shrubs, or deep-rooted native perennials on school land or bordering land or around school buildings? So I'll throw those two over to you, Judy.
Okay, thank you. Yes, those are great questions. We just want to, I just really want to shout out the forestry and horticulture folks. We have been partnering with them since like 2016 with our community tree plantings. We have met, folks in the office. We've met folks on the ground. We get the really strong sense that forestry folks are really passionate about what they're doing. They really believe in native trees. They believe in the right trees in the right spot. They have tried, in 2019 to go door knocking to try and get more uptake on their street tree program. They're thinking about some great ideas in terms of, when we do our community tree plantings, how to, ensure that those trees survive as best as they can. And I think for them, it's budget, right? They are kind of in this position where they plant more trees, hoping that they will survive without the budget to maintain them. And that's really kind of what kind of gets them stuck. So there's great folks on the forestry department. They've always been willing to chat with us, to meet with us. We are part of a Air and Trees task force that has a number of city divisions, public health, forestry, and planning, and we try and be that bridge, try to convince them, us as residents, Naturalist Club, all these organizations, great engaged residents, we are not the barriers. We are trying to be the bridges here, right? We want a better city. So we're definitely working with them as much as we can. I call them my new best friends. I don't know if they see me that way, but I definitely see them that way. And is there anyone interested in increasing naturalization? So I think there's definitely conversations about that. It makes sense on their end, just increasing the woodlots. Unfortunately, we don't actually monitor our woodlots currently. So that's a gap that was identified in the draft urban forest strategy. So that's something we have to deal with as well. A lot of these woodlots have now just become spots for a lot of invasive trees, and we need to focus our energies on a lot of things, but including our maintaining our woodlots. But that's a great question, and I think that forestry is open to that. They just need more time and resources, but they're definitely on the ball.
And direction from council, right?
Yes,
council,
that's right. They need that push. And I don't think they have to push forestry hard at all. It's just that they are jammed up. In terms of working with the school boards to try and get more trees, we tried that for a couple of years. We found it very difficult, to be honest. There was just concerns, we had a principal actually tell me, like, what if a kid runs into a tree? And I was like, well, then I guess you can't have other kids with the building or the basketball court or the cars that are in the parking lot. Like, it's actually very challenging. And I think it's because, staff are really focused on what happens inside the school, that they don't have a lot of time and energy to focus on the outsides of the school. We're definitely open to try and get more trees. And I think other organizations are trying to kick that can down the road as well. But it's not the easy sell that I think we all think it is, right? Like, they have green space, they have kids, they need shade,
Well,
and
some schools don't have green space at all.
some schools don't have green space, and what do we do then? But that is an ongoing thing for us.
Yeah.
Thank you for that question too.
So I can't resist. I have to jump in here and give a plug to Alex and Zoe from Dundas. Yeah. And Alex and Zoe, for those of you who don't know, I think they were the first ones to reach out to us around our Community Climate Action Network and getting involved. So they've started to organize people in Dundas and to connect with other existing organizations in Dundas to get neighborhood level climate action happening. So if there's anybody on the call tonight who's out in actually they're focusing on Dundas Flamborough Ward 13, and you want, as Alex says, you want to chat about achieving these things in our community. And Alex uses an example of, hey, more places for trees. Maybe the vacant Canadian Tire site near Dundas is someplace where we could work with somebody to see more trees planted. Where else in our neighborhoods could we plant trees? So if you want to reach Alex and Zoe and get involved, you can email them at 13, that's the number 13, or action@gmail.com.
And there was a nice comment from Megan Sankey about Juby, or your tree, you know, where you presented the extra trees. It said, love these trees. I wonder if adding the shadows from those trees in your projections might make a huge impact on our understanding of their impact. I think that's a really nice, I like the idea of actually seeing, you know, the shadows of the trees and how they're providing shade, actually, you know.
Yes, and if anyone
Nice
can help
idea.
with that, you know, like I was saying, I just use Google and Canva. Definitely, you know,
Yeah.
reach out to me. I think that's a great idea for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, thanks.
Beatrice, I see a great question for you.
Oh, yeah.
And the question is there any information available on low traffic neighborhoods, LTNs, as they exist in the UK, and how the same approach might work here?
Yeah, I don't know too much about that. I did see an article saying that the program was actually scrapped because of, you know, complaining, people saying it was creating a mess and confusion, and so I don't really know where it's at. I'd be interested to pursue that and follow up on that. But it didn't sound like it sounds like a great idea, but it seemed like it had pushback from of course some complaining people. So squeaky wheels. So I don't know. We'll take a look and see into that. Right?
And Debbie asked, is there a problem developing the land that was previously industrial in the north end of the city of Hamilton?
Do you want me to start with that one? There could be, and so here's the challenge. You know, some of that land, especially when you move north of Burlington Street, if you imagine once upon a time before we were all here, before a lot of us, you know, settlers were here, that whole area was a massive wetland complex with 13 or 14 creeks that flowed over the escarpment down through what's now the lower city out into Hamilton Harbor. And as industry came in, they literally filled the wetlands in with a lot of industrial waste. So when you look at a lot of that land now, especially, you know, even if it's land that's sitting vacant, though, some of those fit the really true definition of a brownfield. And when you want to transition a use in the province from what would be considered, you know, an industrial use, a less sensitive use, to something like residential or even parkland, the bar is set high in terms of the level of remediation that needs to happen. So probably for a lot of our really heavy industrial lands, it's going to be a challenge to see redevelopment to the level of residential happen. That's not to say that it couldn't. You know, you look at the fact that the city's doing a redevelopment on the harbor front right now, that area is probably not as problematic as some of the core area of the industrial core. But it does make it more challenging and more costly. And one interesting thing to think about, you know, I've had conversations with people in neighborhoods closer to the industrial core who, when they think about those brownfields, they talk about opportunities for green industry. So, you know, what kind of transition could we see happen there that would still allow us to make use of that land as viable employment land? Because that's important too, right? You want to build a city where people can ideally live and play, but also work, because that's going to help to keep carbon footprints small. So what could we see happen there? What kind of in future looking industry do we want to see set up on some of these brownfield sites so that people have good jobs to go to that are maybe providing products that are going to help us to live in a low carbon way moving forward. So I just throw that out there. I guess just to say it really does vary depending on level of contamination of the land, but safe to say that the more contaminated it is, the more challenging and costly to remediate to the level where you could put housing on it.
And then there was a question from Colleen Saunders. In follow-up to the 3 towers on Green Road, a small group of us are trying to stop this, but it's proving very difficult. Any suggestions what we might want to do from the environmental angle? Colleen, I think with regards to that development very specifically, when I first learned about it, when it kind of was announced and we all learned about it, my first thought was, how are they going to service it with transit? Because right now they can't. And when we're thinking about a development like those towers, we're sort of looking at the perfect example of building the wrong type of buildings, as Linda was talking about, with, you know, 50 up to 50 stories high. In that it's going to be fairly high density, but it's not going to be a heck of a lot of people who are prepared to ride a bus. There's probably going to be parking there. And really what we're looking at is an incredible amount of people who are all most likely, because of where those towers are going to be located, relying on private vehicle usage. So my first reaction to it and my ongoing reaction to it is that it's going to increase vehicle miles driven. It's going to increase community emissions from vehicles. And that just seems incredibly obvious to me based off of its location and how difficult it'll be to service it with transit, if ever. Because it is also worth noting that this term of council was supposed to address area rating for transit, but the subcommittee met once. They didn't like my delegation that I made, and then they haven't met again since. And so that's a problem that still remains, and to everything I've been able to determine will just remain a problem for that development. And the developer obviously doesn't care. It'd be great if the city councilor could be made to be more concerned about that impact for sure.
I have an interesting question from Erin, and Erin asks, does the city have an inventory of all vacant lands within the urban boundary, public and private, that are suitable for intense housing development? So yes, my understanding is that there is a lot of that information out there. But I'm also going to add that I think what's also important is to think about what the possibilities are. So, you know, earlier on, I made reference to the second dwelling unit policy, you're sort of forward looking. How much of that will we see? Will there be a lot of uptake and a lot of creation of opportunity for people to have a place to live coming out of that? I guess I don't fully understand, you know, is the city doing a fulsome projection of what that piece is going to look like as they try to figure out how much land do we need to accommodate future growth. I think another important question to ask as well is, especially right now with the land needs assessment methodology that requires that market demand assessment, how is the city doing that? You know, the city has a consultant who's come in to take a look. And we've raised the issue as Environment Hamilton around the reality in other municipalities, and we know the same thing is happening here, for instance, where demographics play a very important role. So in municipalities like Waterloo region, we know that the trend has been baby boomers, and that's a big cohort. A lot of them, when they get older and the kids have moved away out of the two-story house in the suburbs, they're not necessarily aging in place. And the reason is because those homes that the boomers have bought are substantially larger in square footage than the homes that previous generations before the boomers were buying. So with those previous generations, there has been a tendency to age in place. It's, you know, smaller space, whatever, it's working for them. For boomers, there's more of a tendency to move out. So right there, we've asked that question within the context of Hamilton's land needs assessment, because all of the indications say to us that there's been an assumption made that seniors are going to age, that the aging population is more likely going to age in place. The problem there is that if you assume that there's going to be more of a transition out, that's single family ground-based housing that then becomes available for somebody else to move into, and it lessens the market demand to build more on the edges. Do you see what I'm saying? So you know, we all need to be thinking about that too, and asking questions around, you know, now that we've got a provincial government that's imposed this market demand analysis, okay, well then what are the subjective assumptions we've made here around how that's going to impact on the analysis that's done? And so we have concerns that, you know, there are assumptions being made within the context of Hamilton's land needs assessment that I think fair to say we're not convinced are the right assumptions, and they're assumptions that may be driving us in a direction that justifies more of a land need than maybe really exists. And there may be other examples. I mean, that's just one demographic example. There may well be others that we need to be thinking about and asking about. But it also says to me that, you know, that opens up a whole Pandora's box when you set up a process that's driven by market demands, when really, if this is all about, and it should be all about, curbing sprawl, then the really important factors should be those density and intensification targets and how we work towards meeting them. So I sort of answered your question and added more. I hope that's okay.
I'm really liking the comments around voting and how we have such a low turnout for votes and in our municipal elections, and that is so true. And I did see a little comment there about term limits, another thing, or something else. But definitely we need to get more people to vote.
And Ian, I have to read this one too. Speaking of voting and also just engagement and support, and taking a position on issues. And this is from Jason Morris, and Jason is, oh, maybe I shouldn't ask. Maybe I better not read this one out loud because he sent it to all panelists. But basically, the gist of the message is, that community organizations, including neighborhood organizations, can play a role in this as well. So maybe my message out to all of you is that if you're part of a neighborhood organization, you may want to think about going and having the conversation about this issue and seeing if there's interest and support for the idea of your organization expressing an official view about where the city is going with urban growth management and what you think should be happening. And we can certainly give you information if you need any sort of support in the way of resources or details, if that's something that you think you'd want to do in your community.
Yeah, and in addition to that, anyone who's potentially reaching out to your city councilor, if you get a response and you wanted to check in with us with regards to that response, definitely feel free to let us know as well. If a city councilor gets back to you with a question and you're not too sure about what the answer to that question is, feel free to respond to us and just include us and ask us for any feedback. We're very much here to help out in any way that's possible. And so we're not just trying to get you guys to, go out and call your city councilor, but if you feel that you need a little bit more prep work, or if you have some more specific questions, you can definitely contact us at any time, either before or after you've already contacted your councilor for sure.
There's also a question here about, and this is from Alex. Alex asks, are any councillors currently supportive of freezing the urban boundary? What has worked to get them on board in your experience, EH? Well, I can't answer the latter part of that question yet because we're still working away on that. I can tell you that I have definitely heard our mayor very recently publicly state that he does not support boundary expansion. I hope that our mayor will continue to stick with that position. And we'll certainly share more as we go in terms of what we're hearing from councillors about where they're going to land on this issue. I think probably some of them aren't saying anything publicly because they're feeling as though, we're kind of midway through a process here. But that doesn't mean to say that now is not a critical time for all of us to be reaching out to them and convincing them that they should be for reasons that we believe are obvious and important, that they should be standing with us and supporting a firm boundary. But for sure, the mayor, I know, is on record recently in saying he does not support an expansion. So that's a start. We need to chip away from there.
Mm-hmm. I think to add to that, I think, for folks who might have just given up on their counselor for whatever reasons, think about folks that that live in other wards and get them potentially, thinking about these issues and suggesting to them that they reach out to their counselors, right? There are some counselors out there that there's still hope. There's hope out there. So that's just an idea.
So we're getting close to 8, and I know that there are a lot of questions and comments in the chat. Do others, are there any other ones that anyone else thinks we should be raising and discussing now?
Or if anyone has a question that you did put in the chat and we haven't answered it, definitely feel free to type it out again or copy and paste it into the chat just so we don't miss it before we wrap up.
Yeah, and I would add too that there is email contact for all 4 of us. Our direct emails on the EH website, www.environmenthamilton.org. So feel free as well if you have questions or you want more information or you want to make comments on anything that the 4 of us shared with you tonight. Feel free to reach out to us via email. And we'll be happy to respond to you as best as we can.
Not seeing any questions. Just thanks for people for us to do the webinar, but thank you to everyone for attending tonight. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It makes us feel so much better when so many people are interested in these issues and we can talk to you. So I guess from all of us, thank you, and watch your inbox. You will be getting an email from us soon with that action sheet, and we would urge you to help us by taking those steps and stay in touch, and we'll happily find more ways to get you involved if you'd like to do more to help us with this effort. It's a critically important one, and we have to make sure that the city makes the right decision at this point in the process.
Thank
So
you.
with that, I guess we're all going to say good night.
Yes, thank you guys. Thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Everyone.
Bye.